Many RTS campaigns have a meta map, which dictates the flow of their campaign, such as in Dawn of War Dark Crusade. Meta campaigns aren't inherently a better or worse approach compared to a traditional linear mission structure. It depends on how well it's executed. Meta campaigns are easy to mess up and be an anti-fun grind, so they should not be tacked on as an extra feature. Meta campaigns should be the entire focus for the single-player campaign, or a substantial DLC like Company of Heroes 2's Ardennes Assault. Let's take a look at some of the reasons an RTS might want to do a meta campaign over a traditional linear structure. Not all types of RTS games are going to work equally as well with a meta campaign, and that's crucial to identify. Meta campaigns tend to consist of procedurally generated skirmish missions with certain perks such as different win conditions. Short 1v1 skirmishes with constraints doesn't make sense for an RTS game like Supreme Commander, which instead shines in a lengthy sandbox-style mission on massive maps. With an emphasis on skirmish-style missions, the skirmish AI needs to be really fun to verse for a meta campaign to not just feel like a grind. While Rise of Nations has minimal variation in its missions, the skirmish AI is so fun to verse that it hardly matters. Meta campaigns give the player more agency, which ties into the power fantasy that RTS games can deliver. It's one thing to be in control of a big army, but it's another to coordinate an entire planetary conquest. Good meta campaigns deliver a sense of progression as territory lines shift and grow. Meta campaigns give the choice of where and when they attack. Do you go straight for the enemy stronghold, or first build up by capturing neutral territory? Do you finish off the crippled empire, or do you prioritize harassing the biggest threat? Do you fortify areas as you advance, or focus on full aggression? These types of decisions are fun and more meaningful than lame story choice cliches. Meta campaigns typically feature a meta resource gained from conquests and is used for upgrades or temporary bonuses. They also generally include progression of unlocking new content, hero upgrades, global perks, and the pacing of starting forces. Progression is typical in linear campaigns too, but it's a lot more fun when it's the consequence of the player's decisions, such as being tied to sector bonuses. Meta campaigns generate tension by being an arms race of escalating power between you and the other warring factions. As your territory lines grow and forces strengthen, so too does the enemy's, which is viewable at all times. Meta maps also serve as a great form of contextualization without needing excessive exposition and introductory dialogue. Some RTS games have excellent story-driven campaigns, but those are the exception and not the rule. RTS games make it difficult to do narrative because of the scale and perspective. There's no face-to-face character interaction or dialogue choices, while the top-down view detaches the player. The new player thoughts of why do I care and why do my actions matter is easy to identify and answer when you're a small army sitting on the island of Japan, surrounded by barbarian hordes and the empires of Korea and China. With minimal character dialogue and narrative, an RTS can instead focus on lore and backstory, the context around the game. Who are the factions and characters fighting over the world? What are their personalities, and why should you even care? I don't consider that narrative because context doesn't need character development or interesting plot twists. Dawn of War Dark Crusade is a perfect example of lore without story. Meta campaigns also have the potential for interesting show-don't-tell through gameplay on the meta map. What if the chaos in Dark Crusade were overly aggressive while the orcs rapidly regenerated their forces and space marines could summon reinforcements from their Imperial Guard allies? Video games should always try to communicate through gameplay mechanics instead of cutscenes and dialogue. The Global Conquest mode in Command & Conquer 3: Kane's Wrath did this by having unique victory conditions for each faction. Company of Heroes 2's Ardennes Assault uses excellent show-don't-tell through its representation of the battered US companies holding out in the Battle of the Bulge. Manpower is finite across the campaign, so every loss you take on the battlefield is permanent across your global company strength, and that can result in a campaign loss if each company is depleted. Watching as your airborne company is removed from the metamap due to your failed mission is far more emotionally impactful than some corny dialogue in a cutscene. Another benefit of meta campaigns is the ability to make failing a mission acceptable. In a traditional RTS campaign, you need to win every mission to progress, else it won't make sense narratively. Being forced to replay a mission in a traditional campaign isn't fun because it's heavily scripted. Meta campaigns, on the other hand, aren't limited by story, so losses can just delay progress or incur a penalty. Because meta campaigns make it okay to fail an individual mission, they can be made more challenging without the loss being overly frustrating. When failing a mission is more of a possibility, then more tension is generated and you can have wider fluctuations in difficulty to keep players on their toes. Since it's okay for players to lose individual missions, the game can be designed around not being able to save scum. Without the ability to restart a mission or load old saves, every decision is permanent and tension is much higher. Save scumming is not fun, yet players will do it anyway out of the desire to optimize and be efficient. If a campaign is intended to be played without save scumming, then the overall campaign should be short. Having to restart a 5-hour playthrough, such as Ardennes Assault, is very different to having to restart 20 hours of progress, such as in XCOM. With a short campaign playtime, there needs to be an emphasis on replay value, which is a huge potential and benefit of meta campaigns. Meta campaigns are inherently repetitive, so the repetition has to be fun and not feel like a grind. Meta campaigns don't need scripted missions, but it also needs to be more than just a set of regular skirmishes strung together. To avoid repetition, missions should have random or semi-random properties such as win conditions, mutators, map types, AI personalities, and many other modifiers. Mix all these qualities together and you end up with a large number of semi-unique random missions, which you could describe as procedural generation. The extent of the required variation depends on how fun the skirmish AI is to play against, which is more of a consequence of the game's design and mechanics rather than the technical complexity of the AI, though obviously a smarter AI will help. Dawn of War Dark Crusade gets away with very little mission variety because its skirmish AI is fun to verse, but that's not the case for Company of Heroes 2. Instead, Ardennes Assault navigates around its poor skirmish AI by having massive mission variety and more scripted missions and mutators. Procedural generation can also apply to the strategic level, the metamap. Factors such as spawn locations, territory lines, mutators, resources, bonuses, and progression can all vary, which will make repeat playthroughs feel much more unique. The great thing about meta campaign design is that it isn't limited to RTS gameplay. XCOM 2 is one of my favorite games and a very solid implementation of the meta campaign. XCOM 2 has different build orders that have massive implications for your in-game performance, such as weaponry and abilities. As XCOM 2 is an RPG, it makes sense to have your tactical gameplay heavily emphasized by your global progression, more so than an RTS. The balance of how much impact meta strategy has opposed to the RTS gameplay is a delicate line. As a general rule for RTS games, the tactical side should matter much more. It feels awful to be thrown into an utterly unwinnable battle. While the metagame should have randomized variation, it should also have settings that the player can tweak to configure to their preferences and to add more variety to repeat playthroughs. Difficulty is one factor that can be very flexible, such as separate difficulty sliders for the meta elements and the gameplay elements. Specific settings may make a game more easy or difficult by removing or tweaking a meta mechanic, or it may just be a personal preference that someone finds a particular mechanic to be annoying. The campaign could also be tweaked to go for twice as long, or all of the battles are 4v4 instead of 1v1. The meta campaign could only contain one powerful enemy instead of 6 weaker ones. There's so much potential for options that are just minor tweaks but can have enormous replay value. The majority of missions in meta campaigns will be randomized skirmish missions, but not all of them need to be. There's room in meta campaigns to have scripted missions for extra tension, or inversely, a more guided introduction. It's typical to see a scripted introductory mission that serves as a tutorial, then opens up the meta map to the player. The final mission can also be an epic battle, or each rival faction can have a scripted stronghold mission, such as in Dark Crusade. Parts of the meta screen could also be scripted, such as the Alexander the Great campaign in Rise of Nations. Linear campaigns, as opposed to meta campaigns, don't need to be opposites, they can incorporate elements of both. The StarCraft 2 campaigns are mostly linear, but give the player a choice of which missions to pursue first to determine the unlock order of units. Missions can have more than simply win or lose states depending on the game mode. If missions can be resolved with grey areas such as stalemates or Pyrrhic victories, then there's much more tension. Even if victory is inevitable in an Ardennes Assault mission, you're still trying hard to minimize losses as the manpower bleed diminishes the company's strength, which carries over to subsequent missions. In XCOM 2, suffering wounds on your operatives leaves them unable to participate in future missions while they recover, forcing you to rely on inexperienced rookies. Non-linear success states also adds more depth and consistency to an auto-resolve mechanic. Meta campaigns aren't inherently better than a traditional linear campaign and are suited to particular RTS styles more than others, but when done correctly, meta campaigns have many benefits. Meta campaigns enhance the power fantasy of RTS games and give the player choices about their global strategy while hooking them with progression. They also have the potential to communicate through show-don't-tell gameplay, which resonates more with the players than fluffy dialogue. Meta campaigns are less scripted, so individual missions and the wider campaign should have procedural generation of maps, win conditions, game modes, mutators, and AI personalities. Higher mission failure rates creates more tension and opens up the removal of save scumming. Advanced options further add to the replay value by allowing players to customize their experience and make repeat playthroughs unique. Thank you for watching. My name is Callum McCall, game designer at Stardock. Subscribe to the YouTube channel to keep up with all of our content and announcements.